Thank you for joining us at Design Talks Now, the virtual version of Design Talks hosted by Design Pavilion in celebration of NYC by Design. I'm Eileen Shaw, producer of Design Pavilion, New York's premier public design exhibition held through the pedestrian plazas of Times Square and open to all. The May event has been postponed, but we're here now with a daily curation of Design Talks to keep the conversations alive and ongoing. At a time when content and sharing are a dynamic addition and necessity to our professional and private lives, we are honored to share programming developed with our prestigious partners. Our series explores topics pointing to the future, resiliency and sustainability, and humanity as touched by design. And certainly, we'll talk about where we are today from this day forward. The importance of such programming is to document this historic and comparable point in time in a thoughtful and thorough way. You are contributing to this time capsule, as well as inspiring what will come next. To kick off the series, we're very pleased to present Design for Harmony, a conversation between Dror, founding president of Studio Dror and SuperNature Labs, and Haluk Kulin, head of strategy and growth at SuperNature Labs. So now, let's begin.
In the past, we were much more in tune with nature, and we felt a deep connection to the natural world. But somehow this changed, and the trend of global urbanization is now in full swing. Today, over half the world's population lives in cities. By 2050, it will be close to 70%. It is clear that we will have to continue to build cities, but the way we currently build them has contributed significantly to the degradation of the environment, human health, and community prosperity. Our experience of nature in cities has become a designed interface. In this sense, urban design has failed. But what if we could change this? What if we could change urbanism as we know it? To find a way back to nature and forward together.
Thank you. So happy to be on Design Talks and to be with Dror. I'm Haluk. And we are in very interesting times. Where do we start the conversation? Dror, you've been missing for a while, and I know where you've been, but I don't think most people know where you've been. So let's start from there before we get into the question of designing for harmony. So what's been happening?
Yeah, thank you, Haluk, and thank you, Eileen. It's a pleasure to be back. It's a pleasure to be here. So a lot of things have happened prior to COVID-19. I think that at some point, around the time when I turned 40, I realized that I need to change something in my approach. I need to change something in my practice. And it came as a result of me spending more time in nature and realizing that I'm a different person when I'm in the city and when I'm in nature. I realized that while my interest as a designer has always been to rethink design typologies and rethinking how we can improve well-being of people, maybe it's time to think about what the world needs as a whole. And I don't know that I've asked myself that question before. And what was quite interesting at that time was that the answer came out flying right away. And it was the integration of urbanism with nature. At that time, I realized that design practice, the way I've ran it for the last 16 years, is quite limited in terms of the way we bring innovation. And that while practicing a big percentage of my time and most of the team time to innovate on ideas that nobody asked us to work on, we need to formalize that. We need to create a new entity that works on those innovation in a more organized way, and that's where SuperNature Labs was born. SuperNature Lab at first was really about rethinking what is the future and what is the intersection between urbanism and nature, as I said. But I think the main thing was really to think comprehensively about design. And, over the last 16 years, it was very clear to me that the value that we brought as a design practice was the fact that we're practicing with no boundaries between specific disciplines. So we bring a lot of fresh and innovative ideas from one place to another, and projects of different scale, whether it's a product design or all the way up to master planning approach, kind of start to think about the intersection between the different disciplines that often don't speak to one another. So when we started working on that, and when we first built SuperNature, I kind of felt the need to disappear for a while and to be even more selective on the project that we're taking. And in fact, we actually went into a period where we did not accept any new project and just focusing on developing new IP. It was a fascinating journey. It was really incredible to discover so many things that I never thought about in terms of kind of putting a bigger lens, a bigger magnifying lens on being inspired by nature. I think it was kind of subconscious at first that I just realized that, I just behave differently. I have deeper conversations with my wife and kids. I at some point realized that my best ideas are coming from nature, but I never kind of put the lens on that. It just happened. It took a lot longer than I thought to kind of compile it all together and realize that it's not just a bunch of different IPs that we develop, but it's really a new approach. It's a new design language. It's a new philosophy. And we are now getting to the point where we're starting to put it together in such a way that it's not just an internal tool for us, but it's something that other designers and architects can use. And so that's in a nutshell what we've been busy with.
Yeah, it does sound like a journey when you hear it again. This notion of designing for harmony, I'd like to kind of open that up a little bit more. You're talking about urban, you're talking about nature, you're talking about how can you bring them together, you're talking about harmony. How do you design for harmony, and how does that change from designing for sustainability, let's say?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, let's start with what does that mean, designing for harmony? So first of all, I say designing for ecological harmony. That's the goal. So often, what we do have tremendous ripple effect, some of it positive, some of it negative. I realized at some point that we sometimes just choose not to pay attention to what is not in our scope, what is not in our area of expertise, what is not in our territory of responsibility. And that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem because we are creating content that creates tremendous damage. When I first realized, for instance, that the housing industry alone takes 50% of the world's natural resources, that's just hard to comprehend. That's just so hard to understand. Like why do we have to use so much of natural resources to build shelter for ourselves? So when I talk about harmony, I first want to think of this idea that everything we do should strive to do better and to improve the world as a whole, not just the well-being of a few that we design for. So that's really kind of the main aspect of harmony, of designing for ecological harmony. Taking responsibility for our action, understanding the source of the material, understanding the footprint of what it takes to bring them into our projects, and just by understanding that, I think actually you become more creative, because you understand, okay, I don't really have to use this. What else is available for me to use? What else can I work with? The definition of sustainable for me is long lasting, right? Is something that really have a longer duration. I know that it means a lot of different things, and a lot of time it's just about how can we do less harm? How can we just improve the way that things are being done? And if I improved, okay, it's more sustainable. I feel good about myself. I did less harm. Ecological harmony is about doing good, is about doing better, is about improving across the board. And I think that that's what we should strive for. Not, sustainable is just not enough anymore. But Haluk, I want to actually, flip this question to you, because I know that you articulate that slightly different than me. Why don't you share with us how you view the difference?
It's one of those places where words have meanings. And I'm going to start with that. And we've been living with sustainability for a while. And my experience on it started with Unilever, when Unilever decided that it was going to be a mission-led, sustainability-led company. And it realized that it was almost impossible to be sustainable. Because to your point, the logic was, how do you do no harm? And the balance is not in the not harm. The balance is between how can you grow greater capacity and make that capacity something that sustains everybody and helps everybody thrive. If there is no thriving, there is no nature. Rather than how can we keep it the same? I think this notion of keeping things the same is very much a 20th century industrial reaction, and from before as well, but to how fast things started moving, and we wanted to keep things the same. But if we're going to double the amount of housing in the world in the next 30 years, it's not going to stay the same. We need to find a way to build growth with that, because that human capacity is going to emerge and the resources are going to be used. So we have to make sure that 1 + 1 + 1 is 10 and not the same as before. So I think there's a real tension, and sustainability in a way brought us to COVID. Everything that we've been doing for the last 30 years to get better and better and better has brought us to a point where we're seeing that we are not organized in a way to live in nature, in harmony with nature. If there's a crisis, it spreads everywhere rather than be able to contain itself and manage itself. And we don't have an integrated experience of nature. We have to travel to it. We assume that's sustainable. So I think there is so much difference when you think about harmony and how that all lives together, and not just for humans, but for all life, rather than try to think of ourselves as sustainable.
That's right.
You're an artist as much as a designer. Like, you care about how inspiration drives things as much as the purpose of what you're creating. How do you feel that this approach has changed your practice between Studio Dror and SuperNature Labs? Like, what has shifted in what you're doing? Or is it the same, just under a different shell?
That's a great question. So first, you see, it's so easy for us to compartmentalize things. And it's so easy for us to create boundaries between those disciplines. And I think that the big part of the problem is that. I used to be very annoyed when people ask me, oh, so wait, are you more of an artist or are you more of a designer? And I don't have that kind of definition. I don't have that kind of boundaries between, one or the other. The intention for SuperNature Lab is not to be a design practice, is to actually create an approach that allows other designers and other architects to express their, creation and their design. I think that what's interesting for me, over the last 4 years, where I've been working mostly with SuperNature, is kind of find the times where I'm wearing different hats. Right? Wait a second, I'm now wearing the designer hat. No, now I'm wearing, a comprehensive hat. First, I think that we really need to take more responsibility as designers, and it starts, as I said earlier, by understanding the ripple effect. It understands the responsibility that are beyond just the discipline that I'm in, and to try to question those definition. What does that mean to be an artist? What does that mean to be a designer? For me, in terms of meaning, both designers and artists are main purpose is to inspire, right? To make the world a better place. And even if we're doing it through practical aspect, the ripple effect of that are always more inspirational than practical. So I like the idea that we stop, binding and putting those walls and saying, "Oh, I'm an artist, and it's not my area to think about those things." That's one. I think that also we use very often this relationship between going from ego to eco, right? Going from the I to a harmonious we. And in the harmonious we, there is no one person that dictates a certain, design or a certain kind of end point. I think that it's about the integration. I think it's about the collaboration. It's about how we, work together to achieve goals, and not, this is my agenda, this is your agenda, I go my way and you go your way, and we hopefully meet at some point. Is how do we actually achieve those things, and how do we create clarity around our aspiration? I think that today I can see a more important role than making a harmonious civilization, making a harmonious society. I think that we've gotten to a point that is just so, surreal, that that we're just blaming and kind of, I think that creativity needs to strive to create more harmony between everything.
So one aspect that's also interesting that I like to see how you feel about is virtual versus real. And which one do we design for? And do we design for both? How do they help us? What are your thoughts? Because we're talking about a lot of things about design and philosophy, but when you apply it, and you apply it to make something, it feels like the world has changed in a way that what's real and what's not real are merging, helping, and how is that impacting how you're working?
It's a very interesting dialogue those days, right? The virtual world, the physical world. I think that since we live in both, they're both quite important. As creators, everything starts in our imagination, and then it translates into either a piece of paper or you know, you digitalize it right away. My desire is, of course, to impact the physical experiences and to be more in touch with our physical experiences. I hope that my kids will not be just satisfied putting their VR goggles on, sit on the couch and visit Paris, but actually want to visit Paris and actually, enjoy physical interaction. I think that using the virtual world as a tool to achieve better physical world is a very interesting thing for me today. When we talk about the built environment, when we talk about the scale and aspiration that we have, it's much easier, of course, to first dream and visualize it, digitally. And that's for us the starting point, right? Like, we believe that if we can create the type of reality that we want to live in, that will eventually turn into the physical reality. But because those places are so blurry today, right? When I show my kids a rendering and they said, Daddy, when can we go there? That gets me very excited, right? That makes me realize that they're not even questioning whether it exists or not. They want to be there, and that desire alone is quite important. It goes back to the question of inspiration, right? We can inspire through any kind of medium, whether it's physical or digital, and I think that at this point we should strive to use whatever tool is available to us, whatever tool we can, to inspire for a better world.
So what do you think is the most critical experience we all have to have in our lives going forward for us to attain this ecological harmony? Like, what is it that we have to live? What are you preparing?
I can really answer this question in a very different way. I think it starts with our motivation, right? What are we trying to achieve? What do we want to achieve? What do we aspire? Is it really what I want? Is it really, or I'm just satisfying a short-term needs, or I'm satisfying somebody else? I think that there are so many things that we're just used to the way that they are done. We're just used to a certain pattern that we are adapting to. And this is an amazing time to question everything. One of our close collaborator, Bruce Mao, inspired me 15 years ago when he came up with the book Massive Change. And Massive Change basically was the first publication that, at least that I've seen, that compiled all of human efforts and put them in one binded package and said, look, to fix all of this, it's going to take either a lot of Band-Aids, or that we should just forget about this fragmented approach of fixing each one of those things and really rethink something else. Buckminster Fuller said, create a new model that makes the old one obsolete. This is an amazing time for us to rethink what we know, to really rethink what change actually means, and not just apply the normal process patterns, collaborator, choice of of anything, right? Tools. This is an amazing opportunity for us based on, what is happening in the world today to just question absolutely everything. And actually it blows my mind the amount of people in recent months that, send me an email saying, I'm home, and I start to question, I start to have questions I never questioned before. And I actually realized that those things that I'm doing, I don't want to be doing them anymore. I'm really much more interested in that. And I don't know, maybe it's the circle of people that I know. I feel that everybody gets to a more elevated version of themselves. And it's always about the finding, the new realization is always about doing something better and doing more good in every aspect. You talked about virtual world. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I'm just seeing the content more now that they're home all day. I'm seeing more the content of what they're watching on, on their iPads, and a lot of it is just not responsible. A lot of it is just not the kind of inspiration that I would love for them to have around.
You know what's interesting to that level? When we were at Unilever, we were studying the impact that detergent culture had on mothers and children. And this was more than 20 years ago. This was before smartphones, when computers were work devices still. And we discovered during that time that mothers were getting so upset at children getting dirty that they were not allowing them outside to get dirty. And as a result, the lack of exposure to nature was creating a tremendous reduction in brain activity and correlation, and creating anxiety, anger, lack of focus, all these issues that we say are screens. Actually, we could see early on were just a lack of nature, just being exposed to the natural environment, which is so entertaining just because it's alive and because it's moving and because playing with it is learning. And it feels that removing that from where we are has brought us to where we are now, where we're so removed that nature now can attack us so easily because we have removed ourselves so much of it. And the integration back to it is going to change all of us. Not just the ones that are older can appreciate nature, but the ones that are younger that are going to have a very different experience. Tell me more about what you're doing in that context.
You're making me think of a couple of things. One is it starts with awareness, right? And how do we create awareness? Awareness immediately falls into the bucket of education, right? And one of our close friend, Bo Lato, well, a quote of his that I use often is, best place to learn is nature. Playing in nature is learning, and playing with intention is science. And I love that. I feel that awareness to other living things is such a wonderful thing. It gives a tremendous respect, and the idea that, I'm not, when I'm in nature, I'm not trying to kill everything around me, right? Like, I'm not trying to demolish every living things because they are a threat. And the only reason that I view them as threat to begin with is because they're foreign to me. I haven't interacted with them, right? So I'm afraid. And my natural instinct is I'm afraid of you, I'm going to smash. But I think that there's something so incredible about this aspect of not just thinking about humanity. I mean, when I hear things like, oh, we are designing for humans, we are designing for people. I mean, when we were not designing for people, right? Like, I think it's time to not just design for people. It's not just designed for all humanity. It's really designing for all life. It's really designing um, for everything to thrive, and that's very interesting to me, right? When I lived in Holland and I went to school in Holland, I remember that at first I was laughing that one of the country's biggest concern is light pollution, birds. And I said, they don't have problems. They don't know what problems are, and when I think about that, I was so ignorant to understand why is it important for us? Why, a healthy environment gives healthy life to us. I mean, when we say community, it's not just my best friends and my neighbor and my cousin. It's also, the trees and every living things that is in my surrounding. And it starts right here. That inclusion, that awareness, I think is very important. And I think that it's part of what we're working on. Without speaking specifically about, the projects and the product that we are working on. When one of the things that we've done early last year was create 5 guiding principles for SuperNature. And it was fascinating process to create the principles and to write them down and to really question every single word and every single notion. And when we're done, at some point you're like, okay, principles, so we have this document. And from time to time, you start to realize, oh, wait a second, that thing we just did, that does not follow that principle. So you start to realize that step by step, your consciousness about, what does that mean gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then all of a sudden, after a while, you're like, okay, those are my guiding principles. Those are so important, and it's not like, oh, this is a time for philosophy. This is a time for, and this is a time to speak a different language. It needs to, we need to live it. We really need to practice it and to improve the understanding of those meanings. Haluk, you have been extremely instrumental in the last several months to kind of, I say, you put order, you organize and strategize a lot of what I've been working on for the last several years. When you even when you ask that question of the physical and the digital, when it comes out of your head, you're sometimes forgetting what's already built, what's not built yet, and what's not even rendered yet, right? It's like, well, we haven't really worked on that. It's still, and you have done an amazing, I mean, I'm just looking back at the process of what we've done this year to organize a strategy. And I think that that's like an amazing talent of yours that I don't have, right? For me, I just want all of it to already exist. I just want it to appear and to wake up one day and it's there, so I can start focusing on what's next. Tell us a little bit how you do it. How do you know how to organize things? How do you know like what to prioritize on in order to get things in a proper order? Is there a certain methodology that you're following, or
there is so much out there on how to start something, right? There's so much out there. There's all this engineering, there is all these books, there's all these design approaches, and yet more than 90% of everything fails, right? So there is something to be said about what brings success and how do you bring it to life. And I'm going to bring two components together, which I think are critical. You shared with me that you were listening to this teacher who was talking about how she teaches and her methodology, and that you have to help people feel. And once they feel, they can think. And once they can think, they can do. And once they can do, they can share. And that's absolutely true. And everything for humans is that way. And we often forget to feel. Because we instinctively feel, we forget that we feel. And we think, oh, think. Let's make it for the brain. And then we'll make them do things. And then they'll share it. But it's really about feel. And the feeling has to deliver a purpose that people want to share with others. And if that feeling elevates people and they feel gratitude, human beings are such good animals in a way. It's such they have such good intention that if you do good for them, they return good. They pass it along, they pay it forward. And that has been my experience with all brands. If a brand does good and actually gives something that you did not have, it elevates. And so I think the first thing is to remember that that's what it's all about. How can we bring the feeling of what we're doing to life in a way that people can start thinking and doing based on what we have offered them, and then sharing, and we can grow with them. And within that, a lot of people call it the minimum viable product or offering, but it's really not the minimum viable. It's the most holistic achievable. Like, what is the thing that can generate the feel, the full image, even though if you don't have the full components, that helps you establish that then you can work with people step by step and fulfill it. So you can create the full expectation and then deliver to it. And it's within those two markers. And it's not a path. It's not about being small. It's not about being cheap. Nature kills you. You know, if you're not going to make it to the end, if you don't have the resources, and if you're not good at changing that. But I think the focus has to be on, can you create a holistic feeling for what your offering is, that then everybody works with you to bring to life at the scale that you want. I believe that's the only way. Otherwise, you're either too small, too big, too fast, too slow. You get caught somewhere else. Okay, so design for harmony. I want to circle back with the first question that we asked. What are people designing for? And how do they shift to designing for harmony? And I think you can also kind of compare it to partially, you've said a lot about your shift from beauty and invention to purpose and all life. Is that the thing? Like what is at the core of design for harmony?
Well, I think first of all, don't separate between beauty and purpose. I think that we are going to get to purpose through beauty, and I think that I believe that creativity and beauty is actually what's going to save the world. How can we create the shift, and how does other people relate to that if they're, let's say, not working on urban scale projects, which is what we're currently focusing on? I think that in general, I would compare it to drawings, right? If you're, let's say, drawing an object, you can draw the object and that object sits on a white paper, or you can contextualize that object within a particular surrounding. And the difference between those two things is, regardless of whether the object is still the hero within a specific context, it needs to be in harmony within its context, right? It needs to have, a healthy relationship. That we forget sometimes when we are designing in isolation, right? We design, a car and we expect that car to just perform very well, look really good, and we are not thinking of anything else in terms of that context. What does that mean? Harmony? The main thing is context, is to really consider the context of what you're doing. How does that relate to everything else? How does what you're doing right now in the context of your industry, in the context of your industry within a bigger industry, in the context of that industry within humanity as a whole? And I think that you would realize so much by just, putting what you do in a greater context. At some point we shifted from saying urbanism to say communities, right? And the reason why we've shifted from saying urbanism is we said, well, urbanism send a very specific, visual recognition to your mind, right? Like urban looks like that, it's a grid, there is asphalt, there's concrete, there are, facades. And that's not what we're designing. And that's not what we're after. What we're after is, context of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of, context to the environment, to the existing culture, to the existing terrain, flora and fauna, and so forth. I think that we need to do it in every aspect of what we're designing, is really creating a context and thinking about, the even a new meaning of what community means.
Our context is COVID right now. I mean, you started this journey before COVID, but we are now in COVID. What are the implications of COVID on how much we need design and where we're going to go? The word health have a whole different context those days. And I recently listened to a talk that speaks about healthy cells and sick cells. And, cells are designed by nature in every, scale, in every context to always thrive and be healthy. So when we think about like unhealthy cells, something poisoned those cells. What have poisoned those cells? Us. Stuff that we have designed, stuff that we have created. And it's fascinating to think about health in the context of anything that we design, right? Like it was not even a question on, so many different things that we have done. Of course, you have like, you think about whether, it's a UV proof, if it's have fume comings out of it, of course the manufacturing process, but you're not really thinking about health comprehensively in the same way. And I think now it's immediately clear to all of us, right? Like protecting ourselves is not sheltering ourselves in a normal setting, right? It's about the health that thrive by biodiversity, by the intersection, by the connection, by the harmonious balance of things. And that's one of the biggest things we can learn from nature, right? Is to strive to create that type of healthy diversity in the context of what we are creating. Is about
protecting cells of everything, and making sure that we are not poisoning our own cells and other cells, because it comes back. That in general, when we talk about designing for all life, there's two aspects that complete that approach, which is not just designing with nature, but also designing like nature. When we look at the evolution that we have created, sometimes we think about, the last 200 years in urbanism, the last 200 years in design. And when we are putting it in the context of nature, we say 4.5 billion years of evolution. Well, let's put our ego aside and let's learn. Let's really learn from an amazing creation that doesn't create any waste, that is designed to adapt and to thrive. And there's just so much for us to learn from nature. So we are focused right now on the future of urbanism. That's our core focus. And, obviously when you talk about urbanism, it's as comprehensive as it gets. And people were asking me for a very long time, Dror, why are you thinking of new cities? When we have so much built environment, are you planning that we will just abandon all of this and move into new places? And I say, absolutely not, right? But you also have to acknowledge that there is a very, very, very big difference between rethinking on a clean slate kind of approach versus fixing existing problems. And, I always give that example in the context of a hospital, right? There is a delivery department, and then there is ER. And those are very, very, very different places. Here we give birth, and here we are trying to, extend and prolong life. And I think not just that we have to do both, but I today focusing mostly on the blank slate, because I really think that when we ask all those fundamental questions as if everything is possible, that's when we can really reinvent something comprehensive. And then we go back with what we learn and what we know and, fix existing problems. In the next 30 years, we're going to add 2.5 billion people into urban environments. We currently don't have room for 2.5 billion people in the existing cities that we have. So our cities are growing, whether we want it or not. They keep on expanding. And how are they expanding? Either vertically or horizontally, whether we're demolishing, smaller building and building higher skyscrapers, or we're taking over greenfield, open spaces, farmland. And today, every year, we are destroying millions and millions of acres all over the world to build more of an urban grid that kills us all, right? Doesn't give us the type of harmonious environment that we want. So this is what we're focusing on, to basically stop, shift, our expansion into something else, see that that's successful, evolve that, and then go back and address some of the existing problems that we have. For me, when you look at the two baskets that makes our urban environment, there is infrastructure and there are structures. And today, those two systems are not in harmony with one another. Infrastructure is there to give, structure is there to take. That's not how nature operates. In nature, everything is there to provide, and then to take in order to be able to continue to provide. So like working within an existing infrastructure basically means that you're not working on a blank canvas. It means you're not really starting from scratch. You're adapting something that is already, have a predetermined elements to it, and you kind of have to confine to that. So yeah, I think it's an amazing opportunity right now to really think about certain things as if we are starting from scratch and saying, can this moment mark a line in the sand and say, from here on, we just don't do those things like that? Yes, I say absolutely we should.
I love the question that we covered on how the current situation with COVID is changing all of our expectations of change. And we know that currently the way we build cities is killing the planet, is killing us, is killing the planet. We know that we've come to the point where we're not adding quality anymore. And we know that, as you stated, we're going to double the amount of build space in the next 30 years. We're going to build double. And if what we built now is hurting us, doubling it is going to definitely kill us. We're not going to survive that development and come out okay. And I had a mentor who used to say that, change is like a rubber band. It's not that you have the motivation to pull, it's which side you let go that tells you where you change. So Dror, how do we change out of here and let go from how we do it today, rather than change and then go back to how we are today? So how do we achieve that in your mind?
I think that, when we talk about, the necessity of certain systems that we need to put in place in terms of design, in terms of the future of urbanism specifically, it's clear that we have to make things more affordable, faster, and better. I think that there's this perception that good design or better design either cost more or takes away from something else. And I think that that's just a wrong perception a lot of time. I know that we can achieve much, much better environments that cost a lot less, can be made a lot faster, and where people and all life can thrive much more than in the environment that we're familiar with today. And if we cannot achieve it today, that's what we should strive to achieve tomorrow, because it's possible. That's what innovation is all about, right? It's not to, improve something and take away from something else. And we've done a lot of that. We've done a lot of that over the years. A lot of time because we're not aware, because we just don't have this comprehensive view into what we're doing. To give an example, right? LED bulbs. LEDs are wonderful things. They have helped reduce heat and electricity tremendously, but they've taken with them so much. And I think that we have missed understanding the impact of what light is all about, right? When you think of an Edison bulb, when you think of an incandescent light bulb, that is essentially, the closest thing to fire, you have an excellent color rendering index. You have an excellent non-vibration in lights. And then the very first LEDs had terrible color rendering index, which basically is bad for your eyes, bad for your concentration, and it flickers a lot, which basically got you kind of ticked. And all that the packaging of light bulbs communicated is that you save so much on electricity a year. Where is my health? Where is my well-being? Where is my productivity? Where is and all of that is kind of neglected. And I'm sure that it's not because somebody have an evil motivation to do so. It's just a lack of knowledge, right? A lack of understanding. And that's just one example. There are so many examples like this where we assume that we're doing better or we improved something and we've actually made a lot worse. So in that context, I think that it's hard to, how do you protect that if you don't know, right? Like, how do you think you're doing good, but you're actually doing harm? And for me, the answer is not, let's just keep the status quo. Let's just, do the same because, hey, we might actually do worse. Is, well, we have to experiment. We have to play. We have to try. And we should strive to understand more. And we should strive for the right motivation. And how do we do that? We have integrity. We're basically following certain aspiration and principles and that are really rooted in the desire of doing good and improving as a whole.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today with Dror and I. We wish you to stay safe, and we look forward to building a better world together.
Thank you, Dror and Haluk, for this very provocative conversation. And thank you all for joining us. Please do so again for the next Design Talks Now. You'll find topic and presenter information on our newly branded website, so visit us there. And for now, stay safe, stay smart. Design stands together.